Good evening. This is the Chicago Computer Society Linux SIG #2, and this is the August meeting. Offhand, we're going to have a lot of videos that I'm going to play tonight. Most all of them are in the realm of tools for recovering your system. Do not have a closed mind. A lot of these tools work on Windows and Mac OS as well. So they are tools that don't care what operating system you got to do the recovery process for you, or it will also provide an avenue of another backup tool, which backups are one of your prime recovery media. But sometimes you have stuff after you did a backup that you put on your system, brand new, or you modified it significantly, and you don't want to lose that information. Well, in many cases, there's some tools here that will help you learn how to pull those off. And that way, if you do restore the backup, you got a copy of those updated documents that you can now put back on the restored backup copy. We also have situations where the tools we use don't always have to be installed. In fact, many of the tools you will put on either a flash drive and or a optical disc if you're still using them and your machine's even got an optical disk drive. Probably more than half of the machines I've got, and I've got a lot, don't even have an optical drive, but I do have a USB drive that you plug in, and I can do an optical disc if I have to. But optical discs are obsolete like floppy disks. So realistically, even for backups, some people were actually using DVDs to do their backups on. And that's not recommended whatsoever. So at the moment, we're going to open up with tips and tricks. Does anybody have a tip or trick that they want to share with the rest of us? Gee, don't everybody speak up at once. All right, I'm going to share something. And here is, I create more FY postings. Now, normally when we have the website, they get posted there. A few people wanted them in their mail. Since Jerry passed away last fall, we've been doing them by email. Anybody who wants the tips and tricks, which are out there, I've got one or two I got to send out tonight as is anyhow, and I have all my old ones going back pretty far. In fact, number 2500 will probably go out tonight, and 2499 may not have made it out, so I may have to repeat that one. Just send an email to Beata Kernan. That's her address, 1ccsadmin@comcast.net. Asked to be added to the More FYI mailing list. Of course, you got to give your name, and you got to give her a contact email list. I have Windows, Mac, Linux, and there's a lot of tips and tricks for Linux that are buried in there. So as long as you are interested in Linux information, it's in the More FYIs almost always. There's also single board computers like Raspberry Pi and some other odds and ends that creep in at times. But usually it's good information that people need to know. As an example, Apple's iPhone, iPad OS, and Mac OS, they came out with an emergency update. Do not wait for your automatic update to install it. On an iPhone, go to your settings, go to the general tab. Second item is about updates. And if you haven't got it already installed, it'll tell you you got one there. In blue, it says go ahead and download and install. But usually you want to have your power supply hooked up. And that's because it can take a varying amount of time for a backup to occur along with the download. So it's best to have the power cord plugged in when you do it. So that's, and I'll put this back up at a later point. I'm going to stop sharing on that. Now does Bob, you were saying you learned something new. You want to share that idea?
Well, sure. Let me see how I can share my screen. And how are we doing? Desktop?
Fine. Yep.
Okay. Down here in Mint, you have your date app. It's an applet that sits on your taskbar, which is a panel in any other Linux distro. But on this taskbar, this date, I have the time, and I have all kinds of other stuff. And the time was off by a few minutes. I had no idea what had caused this, and it doesn't really matter. Well, first thing you do is you check to see whether or not your system time is okay, and whether the thing that should be feeding into here, the utility in your system, is okay. That means we go to the command line, and it's time, date, control, status. And that's how you write time, date, control in command line words. And it does not require a root password or anything. It just tells you what the system clock is doing, whether it's synchronized, whether it's using the NTP time service, which is another way of synchronizing. That's active. It synchronizes with Ubuntu's own servers. So if Ubuntu's servers go offline or something goes wrong with them, you might have a mess up there, and you might have to make a further change, which I'm not going to go into, where you change the server you're getting it from. In Windows, you might have to do that too if Microsoft server does this. And the RTC and local time zone I don't know about, so we'll keep that out. And what RTC time is compared with everything else, I don't know, and for this purpose, I don't care. All it was telling me was that the local time was reading correctly. And this was saying like 08 when this said 36.
Huh.
Something was not communicating correctly. So here's what you do. And I'll just do this right back. I was able to do it. I was able to right click on my taskbar, which I cannot do when I'm sharing. In fact, I can't click on it at all. Well, that is weird. Okay, there's something else we can do. Taskbar. We'll go into search, and it doesn't say anything.
Isn't that under settings? Yeah.
Yeah, let's do something else.
Well, if you go to the start button again, there's a shortcut to the settings.
Yeah, we'll try
third
settings.
one. The third one on the left column.
Third one on the left. Oh, there. Yeah, right. That. I don't think it's going to have the taskbar, unfortunately.
Usually on a bunch of them, they call it panel.
Yeah, it would be panel,
There's the
but
date time right there. It's
yeah,
supposed
okay. Let's do it. Let's do date time. See what we can do here. If you do this, this isn't going to do what I need to do. It does not relate to the applet.
Okay.
I
Applets is right next to it.
Let's do configure, and you could do all these configures. And I should have. Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
I can do a custom date format, and later on I'm going to reset that. But I don't think we need to worry about much of this. Oh, I could also import from a file if I find out where the old file is. Okay, so what I did was I had to remove calendar, and now I wanted to get the taskbar into edit mode, which I cannot do right now while sharing the screen.
Yeah.
Give me a second. I'm going to unshare the screen and put it into edit mode. But all it is a right click, and then you'll have a little button. Okay. There is a pop-up that you will not be able to see because I'm no longer sharing, which comes up and it says things like panel settings, applets, and there's a button for panel editing, panel edit mode. It's a slider. And you just slide the slider over. And now let me share. And you will see that there is a change. This is now shaded. And what I would be able to do is another right click, which would allow me to add this back. And again, I can't do it while I'm screen sharing.
By the way, for those looking at his screen, there's two black squares, actually three, but one disappears. It's a timeout. The others are related to the share screen options and seeing some of the people who are attending the meeting.
Yeah, those are all Zoom boxes.
Yeah, those usually can be moved some in order to minimize their effect. You can click on and drag them. So
right now, I don't think I need to because they're just sitting here, and they're not doing anything.
Right.
Now, this is what I did. These are the applets which I popped up.
Right.
And calendar is the applet. This I can click on. And I can click on this plus, not this, but this. That's the plus. I don't know. That's the about. That's the plus. It's confusing. And there we are. And I may even, I'm able to drag it over to the right where I like it. Well, maybe it'll stick. Oh, it won't stick while I'm in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's probably the sharing.
It is. But eventually I'm going to just drag this over and it will stick. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing, close up this because I don't need to do any other applets. Although it's interesting. You can put some you can put some applets in that will allow you to do different things. You can disable notifications with one of the applets, and you can have an on-screen keyboard, panel launchers, which would launch applications from down here, and recent documents, which is sometimes useful to some people. You can put separators in, settings. You can put the settings applet in. And I already put in sound because I have to do stuff with my sound from time to time. And another spacer, list of windows, workplace switcher. That one I did put in down here. And if I want to do that, but there's a weird thing about it. It won't click while I'm in share mode, but it does not show, it does not allow you to actually switch workspaces. The only way you can switch workspaces is Control-Alt-I up arrow, and those are my workspaces. And if I want to get rid of this display, Control Alt down arrow. And that's how you handle workspaces in Mint. It doesn't happen from this applet. I don't know why, but it doesn't. So anyway, I've added all that I want to add. So there's also an applet that gives user account details and allows you to switch users if you have multiple users for fast switching.
Like Peter might have.
Maybe. Now I'm going to do that drag and place all the way over to the edge and just show you the result. And as you can see now, my date and my calendar, if it would come up, are at the edge. And eventually I usually add some other details to the time to give the time zone and the AM PM instead of the 24-hour clock.
Yeah, I hate the 24-hour clock myself, so I always change it to a standard 12-hour clock.
Yeah, and I usually do that just by doing custom format and mess around with the letters and the percents. And that's a whole other demo all to itself, how you use those, because there's a table, and you
Yes.
just go to the table.
Yeah, I had on some of my versions of Linux, I have to use that percent stuff, and other ones have reasonable, realistic time setting. And happens to be one that you got to use this percent stuff. So you go do a search, like a Google search or whatever, and you can get an article that has all the percent signs, what they mean, and you select the ones you want to create date time formats exactly the way you want them displayed down on your taskbar. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a video that this is a video I wish I had more than a year ago when I first started. Jeez. I got two cats, and one of them just jumped in my lap right on my finger.
Ouch.
And, yeah, the claws in particular. Hang on one second here while I figure out what I'm dealing with. I think I got the right one. Okay, no, that's the wrong one. I already had the right one. So, now drop that one down. We're going to drop that down, and this is most of the video stuff. I'm going to click on that. I put my, I have a utility that puts my tabs to sleep. Okay, this is a real interesting one. I wish I had known before, because it's spot on with a lot of views and opinions from this guy. Oh, wait a minute. Linux doesn't have a new feature that's in the Windows one. I got to find it. I think it was under hide. And let's see if it'll give me the voice.
Over the things that I wish I knew earlier before switching to Linux as a lifetime Windows user.
You rat. Hang on a minute. For some reason, you're not seeing it.
No, you're right.
And the only thing I can think of is I got to stop sharing and then reshare. So I see sharing is going to be a problem too.
There you go.
Yeah.
In this video, I'm going over the things that I wish I knew earlier before switching to Linux as a lifetime Windows user. So there's going to be 6 main points that I'm going to make in this video. The first being, Linux is fundamentally different than Windows. The best example of this is when I first came on Linux, I was constantly going to the website of the software that I wanted and seeing if I could download a package from them to install it on Linux. It's such a simple thing, but every Linux distribution has a package manager built in. And that package manager is just as simple, hey, install XYZ package, and then it installs it. Simple, fast, secure, just so much better than how it's done on Windows, but it takes a little bit of retweaking your mindset to really grasp this idea. Another thing where it's fundamentally different is everything can be customized. You don't like the file explorer in your Linux install? No problem, change it. You don't like the way your desktop works? Change it. You don't like your browser and all these other things? You just change it. Where in Windows, you're pretty much stuck with how those menus operate, how the system settings and everything appears. All these things are already baked into Windows and are very static. You can't change them. Well, pretty much everything in Linux is dynamic, and you can change at will. So that brings us to point 2. The distribution doesn't matter. The only thing a distribution is different package managers, different ways to installing those apps I mentioned in the first point. And it's a starting place of how your desktop environment operates. So sometimes you get like a KDE version of Manjaro, it's an Arch-based system, and all these other things. Well, that just operates differently than, let's say, an Ubuntu or a Linux Mint. Those things just look different and feel different out of the box. However, I can make both function almost identical to each other. The only thing that's different is how you install packages and the out-of-box look and feel. So again, it kind of brings us back to point 1. You can customize Linux however it is. It's just sometimes it's a little more effort that goes into that customization. So when I say Linux distributions don't matter, well, they really don't. It's just a matter of how much work do you want to put in to get it to where you fit as a user. As me as a user, it just doesn't matter. I customize my Linux install. There's no distribution out there that I'm like, oh, I have to have this or that. I'm just like, hey, I understand it. But as someone new coming into the environment, I highly recommend like Linux Mint. It has more of that Windows look and feel out of the box, so you won't be quite as lost. But just know it is the customization of Linux that makes it so powerful. And don't think that you're stuck on some specific distribution, because every distribution has its limits, and there's things about every distribution I like and dislike. So don't think that one distribution is king and you have to install that one and that's the best one, because there's a distribution out there for everybody. Number 3, there's a lot of misinformation about Linux in the community and just in general. One, in any old forums, there's a lot of bad how-to guides just because many of those steps have changed over the years and they're just badly explained. A lot of times I've noticed on many guides that I follow that experts or people that put together those guides just omit certain basic features because they figure everyone should know that if they're using Linux. So just understand, if you're looking at basic forums and other things like that that are outside of the mainstream, some of those guides, if they're 2, 3, or more years old, they're not going to be very relevant anymore. Point 4, there are some great communities in Linux. However, you can't just go post on any old forum, otherwise you may be ridiculed. So I highly recommend getting on Reddit. There's some great subreddits out there, and I'm going to put in the link description below that you can click on and check out. Linux for Noobs, Linux Questions, and then I also have my own Chris Titus Tech that you can check out and ask any question you want. It's a safe space, so to speak, to where if you're new, don't feel like, hey, I can't ask this question because it's too much of a noob question. Because pretty much any of these subreddits, you can ask anything you want and you'll get a good answer. Point 5, Linux has some unique personalities. And I mean this as a way of saying there's some experts out there that just feel like everyone should know everything about Linux when they first get to it. And that's kind of the feeling I got when I first came to Linux desktop. I was like, This is different, and this is a very vocal minority, mind you, but it's just something that kind of turns off a lot of newbie Linux users. And it's, you'll get trolled. You'll see this command up here. You'll also get some people that'll ridicule you because you don't understand how to pronunciate certain terms like GNOME, or instead of saying GNOME, or Debian, you say Debian, you say OpenSUSE instead of OpenSUSE. There's the, hey, I use Linux, therefore I'm better than you, and I know it. All these things kind of play into that whole obscure or unique personalities of Linux. You get that every once in a while, but it's as more of the masses move to Linux, this is becoming less and less of a thing. Just know you still run into little pockets where I see this type of thing. But overall, just be prepared for a little taste of that when you get into the Linux community as a whole. However, a lot of these people have moved on or have become drowned out by the masses and people that have come into Linux. I know I'm a vocal majority, I'd say, that ridicule these people just because there's no place for them. They're discouraging people from adopting Linux, and just overall just bad personalities that, I wish they'd just disappear from public life as far as Linux goes. And as a most part, they have become far less prevalent than they were 5 years ago. Like, I did try and jump on Linux desktop 5 years ago, and it's not nearly the place it was today. And they were just everywhere, it seemed. Anytime I asked a question, there was always some kind of snarky response. But a lot of that has disappeared, and we've seen so much of these communities pop up that supports new users. So that's why I kind of brought up in the prior point that don't worry about those users. Stick to these subreddits and also the main forums, like Ubuntu's main forums, Linux Mint's forums. Those are some great forums where you pretty much can ask anything as well. And the last and probably the best point about Linux is everything is free and open. So on Windows, when I first came here, I was like, oh man, this is cool. I got a bunch of freeware. And then immediately I almost got a response from about 10 people saying, this isn't freeware. It's free and open. It's called FOSS. Free and open software. What that means is on Windows, when someone gave something free, they'd basically give out a taste of their free software. And then once everyone got hooked to it, they'd switch to more of a commercialized product, now charging for it because they never released the source code or the thing that made that product what it is. Well, on Linux, everything starts open source and free for the most part. And if someone tries to do that, well, they just say, okay, well, no problem. And someone forks that project and it just keeps being open and free. So as far as products coming into the space and charging a whole bunch of money like you see in like Mac's ecosystem or Windows ecosystem, it just doesn't really happen that much in Linux, because almost everything I do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's video editing, photo editing, any of these things can be done on Linux using free and open software. And everything else that I've wanted to do on Linux, the only thing I've really been paying for in the last 5 months of Linux desktop usage is games. There's certain games that I've been playing, and most of them are actually Windows-based games that I'm playing on Linux, so I guess you can't even knock them for that either. So this is probably the most empowering thing, is being able to just say, hey, I want to learn something, I want to go do this. I don't have any of the software. Well, no problem. There's freeware equivalents, or I caught myself again. See, I still haven't broken myself of some of these habits. There's free and open software to do that specific thing, which is just incredible. That's the greatest thing about Linux. And those were my 6 things I wish I knew before coming to Linux, because it would have saved me some heartache, some issues as far as common conceptions. I really didn't know what I was getting into. Even with these 6 things, there's about 20 different things probably I forgot to mention in this video. Let me know in the comments what I missed. And if you'd like to support videos like this one, consider visiting me on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next video.
Now, when he talks about some of the bad actors, I go back to 95 to 97, and it was a bear, and I couldn't get it up and running for years. Bottom line was, when you ask a question, you get the RTFM. Read the F manual. is what it stands for, in case you haven't heard that before. This video I picked up while in some of the other ones that are going to be played tonight. Always check these. Sometimes there's a subsequent one to the one you're viewing. There are others that may be about the same topic or something similar. But I also find a lot of videos for other things I'm interested in. So I just right-click them and open them up on a new tab, and I'll get to them when I get to them. When it comes to customization that he first brought up, customization can be great, but I will tell you, if you go overboard and you got to have remote help, that person may have real headaches trying to find some of the things to fix whatever your problem is or show you how to do something, because they may not be able to adapt quickly to your customizations. This is in particular true of Windows and Mac, where you don't have as much customization. So in Linux, you can customize the hell out of everything, and that makes anybody remotely trying to support you a potentially bigger headache, until they get to know you and get very familiar with your customized environment. So this is also a case where when you're looking at the videos, scroll down and here's show more. Always click on that, and it varies what you're going to see. But he talked about various groups there. Here's URLs for those specific groups that he's talking about to get decent support when you got questions or problems. Other places are these down here. He has some additional videos that may be over here to some extent, but other ones that you can quickly view all of his various videos that he's done. Most of these videos that I'm going to play tonight are no more than 15 minutes, with only a couple of exceptions, and the one's only 17 or 18 minutes. The other one is big. Down below it are the postings that various people who viewed it put their comments, and some of them are really worth reading. So I want to bring this out to all of you. Now, does anybody have any questions at this point? Hearing none, then I'm going to start the main topics of the meeting, and we'll go as far as we can time-wise. This video here.
Something bad happened to your hard drive and now it's showing up blank. Well, let's take a look at that situation and see if we can't recover from it before sending the drive off to experts. Okay, so if you have really important data, you should back it up, and you should back it up on a system other than your main system. You should probably back it up to network attached storage. You probably should back it up to network attached storage that also has a removable USB hard drive or mirrors the data to, say, Amazon S3 for a negligible charge. But if you have a drive that has died and is now showing up blank, or it's making a scary grinding sound but you can still see some of the information on it, then I want to show you two utilities on Linux that may be able to save your bacon. The first is test disk, which will recover from situations where it's basically user error or some sort of weird problem where the disk has been blanked really quickly. The other utility that I want to show you is DD Rescue. Now, DD Rescue is a little different than the DD utility on Linux, and so let's talk a little bit about the situations which you would use these utilities. Basically, 9 times out of 10, unless you can hear the hard drive making strange noises, or your whole system hangs, like you'll go to copy a file off of your hard drive and your whole system hangs or sticks for a second, those are signs of hardware problems. And in the case where you've got hardware problems, you probably should start with DD Rescue. DD Rescue is a utility on Linux that will let you recover information from a possibly dying or a hard drive with mechanical problems to another drive that you can back up the information to. And then once you get the information off of there, then you can work on repairing. It's a very bad idea to try to repair a drive that is failing. You almost always don't want to poke at it. It's like a badger. When you poke at it, it's going to get angry, and then it's just going to shut down, and then the drive's not going to show up in the system anymore. It's going to be bad news. And your only option, if you have to get data off of that, is to send it off to a lab where they're going to try to do fancy things in the lab and just crazy stuff to try to read the information off of the drive. That's not good. That's a bad situation. The other type of failure is when you have a situation where the drive has been blanked, either by an accidental format or a virus or something's like your computer was hit by lightning and it turned off the wrong way, and then all of a sudden your information is gone. Like you boot up and it's like, well, the hard drive's here, but it's just showing as blank. It's a fairly common problem. There's on the Enterprise channel, there's a video about recovering from that situation where sometimes there's a certain kind of Dell RAID controller or LSI RAID controller, but Dell badged or HP badged, where something weird happens, there's a bug, it crashes, and then all of a sudden your disks are blank. That little thing, when it does that, is very bad because it not only wipes out the start of the disk in the partition table, it also wipes out the beginning of the partition, and so test disk by itself is not actually enough to recover from that situation. If you want to recover from that specific situation, then I suggest you watch the video about file system recovery on the Enterprise channel, which is a little more in depth than this video. These are sort of higher level tools. These are like the 200 level tools for diagnosing and troubleshooting the situation. That said, DD Rescue is like the utility DD on Linux. If you've never heard of DD, DD is a very low level utility that basically just copies data from one place to another. It can copy data from device to device, or from file to device, or from device to file. You've got a lot of options. Linux and Unixes in general, including Mac OS and BSD and other Unixes, treat block devices being like a hard drive, an SSD, CD-ROM, anything like that, in terms of the way that block devices work a lot like a file. This is a really convenient way of dealing directly with the hardware. When you need to do stuff that sort of colors outside the lines a little bit with hardware, it is nice to be able to get raw access to your hardware. So what the utility DD on Linux, you sometimes see, it's like, oh, in order to write this image to a USB stick to produce a bootable USB stick, you download this image and then you DD, and then in file IF equal, and then the image file, and then OF equal the file path of the USB device that you want to write to. You got to be careful because DD is insanely dangerous. It is a utility that will do exactly what you tell it to do. And so if you get the wrong drive or the wrong file when you use DD, it's going to overwrite the wrong device, and then there's not really much you can do from that recovery. If you did accidentally do the wrong thing with DD and you immediately aborted the command, even the stuff that I'm going to show you here today probably wouldn't let you recover from that situation easily, because you, in that 1 or 2 or 3 seconds, you would have already overwritten the first several hundred megabytes of your disk, unless you have 2 partitions. And the second partition is what's called an extended partition. The stuff on your first partition's probably lost or mostly lost. It's a pretty damaging situation. So this is not really for dealing with that situation. Although if you have that situation, maybe head over to the forums and maybe we can figure that out. But that's real painful to deal with. So test disk really just looks for situations where that first 512 bytes, something bad has happened to the first 512 bytes. There's usually something still there to go on. But it's not a situation where there's like serious damage to the first few hundred megabytes of the disk, like from accidentally doing something wrong with DD. So first you would run, if you're sure it's not a hardware problem or reasonably sure it's not a hardware problem, you can run test disk. You run through the options in test disk. You get some, these options are basically pretty straightforward, just like this, and this. And then it's like, oh, here's the partition tables. Even though this is showing up as a blank disk, if we look here, we run fdisk. Fdisk is showing that this is a blank disk, But we can run test disk, and test disk is saying, oh no, all the partitions are here. So if you restore this and then try to mount these file systems and then you still get an error, there's a good chance that there's some other underlying damage. Now test disk can also repair the MFT on NTFS, and MFT on NTFS is like the file allocation table, and it stores where all of the files are on the system and important information about the file system itself and how it's organized. There are multiple copies of that on an NTFS disk. Sometimes the first one is damaged, and a lot of the time things that mount NTFS don't really look past the first one. And so test disk can actually look past the first one, see if there's a good one, and then restore the good one over top of the bad one. And then you're up and running again, and that's a good situation. So test disk is a cool utility for dealing with situations like that. Now DD Rescue, on the other hand, is more for dealing with hardware problems and sort of a hardware situation. DD Rescue has a little bit different syntax to it than DD. It's a little bit more abbreviated, and so DD Rescue should be treated with the same reverence as DD, because you can totally accidentally completely destroy your entire system with DD Rescue. So please, 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 if you're a novice and you're not super comfortable with everything that I'm talking about, don't do this. At least don't do this on a good machine. You know, haul out, you know, a system from the closet or something in mothballs and set up Linux on it. There's a bunch of utilities that you can download that are basically bootable ISOs. Parted Magic is one such distro. Parted Magic is a distribution of Linux that has test disk and DD Rescue and some other utilities for looking for lost file systems, which we'll probably get into in a future video. They don't update it as often as I would like, the ISO. So in terms of the underlying technology that it's based on, it's maybe not as up to date as it could be. Test disk and DD Rescue are also available from the Ubuntu nightly CD image builds. They're available in the desktop and server editions of the Ubuntu install ISOs the last time I checked. So you've got options where you get at it. And so definitely booting off of USB or booting off of CD is a good situation to do with running utilities like test disk and DD Rescue. You want to unplug any hard drives that have nothing to do with the bad situation. So if you have a hard drive that's failing, unplug all of your hard drives but the hard drive that's failing. If your Linux box is your daily driver and you're doing this from your main desktop operating system, make sure that you understand which drive your main operating system runs off of, and that should never ever enter into any of the commands with DD or DD Rescue. Just keep that in mind. So one command you can run is fdisk-l to see all of the disks that are in your system, or you can do lsblk -o name, label, size, fs type, model to give you a more abbreviated version of what is going on with your physically attached disks. Now, one nice thing about lsblk is that it's much easier to read than fdisk-l, but it doesn't have all the information that fdisk-l does. And the -o specifies the columns that we want to see on the output format, so that's kind of handy because you can sort of retool it to whatever you're looking for. It's important to understand that the devices that you see are the devices that are available to the system, and so if you see a device that has important information on it that you don't need to be part of whatever operation that you're doing, shut your system down and unplug it. It may sound like I'm paranoid, but until you've accidentally done terrible, terrible things, you won't have the healthy level of paranoia that I do. So please learn from my healthy paranoia. All right, so one DD Rescue command we might run would be dd rescue -d -r1/dev/whatever device it is that we want to read from, and then test.img and then test.log file. Now I could specify /dev/sdb or /dev/sdc if I want to do a direct device to device copy. The first device to DD Rescue is the input device. The second parameter is the output. You can do the like if you've got a 1 terabyte disk that has problems and your operating system drive is a 3 terabyte drive, or you're going to store the image on a 3 terabyte drive, if you do a DD Rescue from the 1 terabyte drive to the 3 terabyte drive, it's going to override everything on the 3 terabyte drive. The only thing that's going to be on the 3 terabyte drive is a byte for byte copy of the 1 terabyte drive. If you already have a file system on the 3 terabyte drive, like you already have other stuff on it, and so you have 2.5 gigs of free space, you would want to mount that file system and use the image file instead of the device. And so I would just create a file called nameofharddrive.bin or nameofharddrive.raw. And so what that does, instead of copying device to device, it copies from the device that's failing, the first parameter, to this file. And this is, I mentioned earlier that the way that Linux works, it's a block devices that a file, it sort of blurs the lines. This is actually a really convenient way to work with stuff, because if you're going from a smaller drive to a larger drive, or a drive where you've got room to put that in more, you don't have to overwrite the whole drive. That 3 terabyte drive could hold 3 different drives that have failed, depending on their size, if it's the 1 terabyte drive that I was talking about, or whatever like that. So it's a really convenient way to work on it. You can also use utilities to operate on that image file just like it was a local file. So you can do some command line magic, and programs that are designed to operate on a block device as opposed to a file won't know the file's not a block device. If you need to mount the drive like as if it was a physical drive, you can use the mount command with -o loop, and it will use the loopback device to mount the file like as if it was a physical device. So it's really convenient to work with it in this kind of a way. If I'm speaking some sort of crazy foreign moon language, just come over to the forums. You need to level up your Linux skills a little bit, but this video is already running a little long, so I don't want to get too in the weeds. So what the parameters do is -D tells DD Rescue to use direct disk access, and what this does is it bypasses the Linux kernel's cache. In a situation where you've got a failing disk, the disk may tell the Linux kernel something wrong, or say, I can't read it. And so the Linux kernel may say, oh, well, I'm going to cache this result. And so if you try to read it again later, it's like, oh, no, here's your bad data. But it doesn't actually ask the disk. And so it could be that if you ask the disk a second time, you may get the data. And so -D tells DD Rescue, don't go through the kernel I/O operations, use direct I/O operations on the disk in order to do the rescue. -R tells it how many times to retry. Now, on the first clone, the first pass, if you are having a failing drive, I would suggest not specifying a large number of retries. We specified 1 retry. 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 100, it's risky, because if there's physical damage to the platter and you have the head sort of going over that, it's like having a hole in your sweater. The hole in the sweater is bad, but then you start picking at the hole in your sweater and picking at the hole in your sweater, and all of a sudden you've got a giant hole in your sweater. And that's bad, because that hole is your data, and you don't want to poke the badger. You don't want to make the hole larger. So once you've got the full drive copied to an image or to another drive, then you can do another pass. This is an important differentiator between DD and DD Rescue. DD Rescue creates this log file. That's the last parameter on the command line. And this log file can be used to only reread the sectors, the parts of the disk that it had trouble reading. So once it's copied the whole thing, it's like, well, there was a hole here and I couldn't read it. You can run another DD Rescue command to focus mainly on the hole. And how you tell it to mainly focus on the hole is the log file. And then if you read 10 times and the head explodes and the disk crashes, it doesn't matter, because you weren't going to get that data anyway. So it's not as bad of a situation as it would be if you just told DD Rescue to, keep reading 20 times. If you'd read 2/3 of the hard drive and it would hit the hole, and then it would keep poking at the hole, and then the read-write heads would explode inside the drive, you're never going to be able to read that last third of the disk. And so that's a much worse situation. And so that's how that works. That's why you should think about it that way. If you've also got a hard drive that locks up or does something weird with the system, the log files are really important, because when the system reboots, it'll basically pick up from where it left off, as opposed to forcing you to start over again. So in that way, even if the drive locks up or locks up the system or does something weird or goes offline, you can still resume the copy from where you left off. You just won't have, whatever blocks it was on when it was copying the file. This is really handy. Now, if you want to mount the image file that you created, let's say you went the image file route and you've created, test.img or test.raw or whatever, one way that you can mount it is mount space -o loop, RO, which will mount it read-only, space, and then your image file name, and then space the directory where you want to mount it. So here we just created a directory called mount point, and then we're just going to run the mount command, and then it's going to mount our image, or we're able to do operations on our image. With the drive mounted, you can browse the contents and everything's basically okay. Now, there is a trick here. If you are creating an image of the entire drive as opposed to a single partition, and you try to mount it, it's not going to work, because the image contains multiple partitions, and there's not an easy way to specify which partition you want to mount. So in that situation, what you have to do is run parted, P-A-R-T-E-D, and look at the partitions in the file and determine the offset in the file that the partition starts. And so once you do that, you can run, parted test.bin or test.raw or whatever, and then type unit. Then it's going to be B, and then print. And then print should give you a list of the partitions on the drive if that part of the drive is not damaged. So from this, you can see that there's several partitions here, and the first has this offset. And so what we're going to do is mount-o loop like we were going to do before, comma offset equal that number, and then the image file, the raw file, the bin file, whatever you call the image from DD Rescue, and then the mount point folder, and then it'll mount. So that's kind of a neat trick. Now once you know how to work with the image file, and once you know how to work with the damaged disk, there are other utilities you can use from here in order to do basically surgery on the damaged drive. This is really important and sort of a beginning technique for data recovery and sort of a beginning technique for understanding what's going on in the underbelly of how things are organized at the device level. So this is really, really just a high-level overview. Even though there's a lot of technical stuff here, and even though this is really, there's a fair bit of detail here, hopefully there's some new tricks you learned and that kind of thing. But this is pretty in-depth knowledge, and hopefully you found it useful. So if you're going to work...
Okay, I'm going to stop that one because it's really over. Don't get panicked. This demonstration here is of the basic DD Rescue, and it's a command line tool. And I know a lot of people that don't want to even think about command line tools, but a lot of times they're a necessity. Fortunately, I don't know exactly when it was, somebody came up with a GUI interface to run DD Rescue with that we're going to get to shortly. So don't stress out. But in DD Rescue, and you can't see that, so I'm going to stop that for the moment and share a different screen. That is, I went to the software store that's in Mint, and this applies to practically any of the Linux operating systems. Also, it applies basically to Snapchat. I mean, Synaptics package. It's a store as well as the one that is recommended with that particular OS. And you go up to the search box, and I stuck in DD Rescue. And I don't know what safe copy is. I didn't dig into that. But here is GDD Rescue, which is a graphical tool. You also have Rescue View, a utility, Forensics Extras, and My Rescue. So there's lots of other things that can be added to the basics of your DD Rescue to give you more capability, more flexibility. So I'm going to stop again on that. I'm going to do another.
Now, are these talking about hard disks that are spinning or SSD or both?
They don't care. So it's both.
Okay.
Now, granted, a bit of what is being discussed in some of these, like the head crash that last guy was talking about, can only be on a spinning drive. It cannot happen on an SSD. But on an SSD, cells start going bad. You might be able to recover some of the information with something like test disk. And test disk, when I first came across that one years ago, I didn't find much in the way of documentation. I couldn't figure the little sucker out, so I gave up on it. Hold on 1 second here. The bad part about DD Rescue and some of the other ones is that you have a situation where what you want to do for maximum flexibility, the command line is best, but it's also more difficult and potentially more dangerous. Hang on a minute here. I'm having a heart. Oh, I know why. There. Okay. I was trying to mute him because he's creating a bunch of noise. But generally speaking, the tools that are graphical, some of them will give you a lot of that flexibility. But I've had troubles sometimes with the graphical software updater in Linux recently. I don't care. I learned originally the command line. So I just bring up a terminal, I stick in the commands and, one at a time, and I update my system, and all of a sudden the GUI updater is working again because it fixed it, whatever the problem was. So that's why you have to not avoid command line. There are too many tools, even in Windows and Mac. I use a fair amount of command line tools because there is no GUI interface, and or it has the ability to do things that's not built into a graphical front end. Now, there are exceptions because all this stuff is in flux. So everything is constantly changing. Today, you don't have maybe much in the way of a good graphical user interface, or it's not as capable as command line. Tomorrow, you could have an all graphical tool that gives you not only the capability what the command line will give you and make it much easier, it may have added features that you don't have to add manually, like the list of search results in the software library of Mint. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And hopefully you don't have an immediate need for any of these. Hopefully you will just remember these things and be able to deal with some of the issues that pop up by referring back to this video or doing your own search and playing the videos like I did. So next I'm going to bring up this one here. This is Test Disk. This is a utility that examines a SIG disk and may be able to repair it, but the main thing is it allows you to copy out a lot of stuff so that it can be saved. Then you can restore a backup and then reapply the material that you saved. So it almost acts like a differential backup that we might use on Windows versus an incremental backup. An incremental backup says, hey, maybe once or twice a day you're doing an incremental backup of all the changes, and the bad part is when you restore the backup, you must apply all incremental backups oldest to the newest in that order. You can't skip around and do only the ones you want to do or do them out of order. A differential backup creates one backup file after your backup, and it will accumulate the most recent version of any file that's been created or modified. And then after you restore the backup, you just restore the differential backup, and you're back to the time of the last differential backup that was done, and anything after that time that you made changes to, you'll have to do again. Hopefully that's not very much. But anyway, I'm going to get into this one.
Hey, greetings from Wyoming. OSY guy here, and this is my tutorial on recovering data with a program called Test Disk. Now I've posted a previous video back in April on recovering data. In this example was from a Windows computer using Ubuntu. Now this particular scenario was that the computer hard drive of a particular computer was just not completing the boot process in Windows, and so it couldn't get all the way to a fully healthy screen. So the hard drive was okay, but the operating system had some corrupt components in it, and it just couldn't finish the boot process. Well, the good news about that is that the hard drive typically is still in good shape, and you can access the data, but you have to do it by using a substitute operating system. The way that I do that is to take out a copy of Ubuntu, in this case 17.10, and I just have it on a flash drive, and that becomes my temporary operating system. As I boot into Ubuntu on that Windows computer, then I can open up the Nautilus file manager, and I can go to the Windows hard drive and locate the user folder and copy data from that user folder to an external hard drive hooked up to that computer that's running a temporary version of Ubuntu. That works really well. However, what I'm actually talking about in this case is when the hard drive is actually just bad, as in not accessible. It has some errors showing up, and as a consequence, it does not get recognized with any file manager. So it doesn't make any difference if it's a Windows File Explorer or Nautilus in Ubuntu. Can't get that hard drive to show up. Now I actually have such a hard drive in this case that I'm going to be talking about. One of my customers came to me with I have him running Ubuntu Mate on an old Windows XP computer, and the hard drive just suddenly showed up saying read error. It couldn't even boot into the operating system there either. But it was because it was an unhealthy hard drive as opposed to just having a bad section of the operating system that was keeping it from booting. So I extracted that hard drive from from that laptop and just put it into a hard drive dock like this, and this becomes a case that will run the hard drive as an external USB device, and I've tried to get it to show up in Nautilus, and it just wouldn't show up. So what do I do next? Well, there is a utility that I want you to take a look at. It's called Disks, and this utility, the very first hard drive that shows up in the list is my healthy hard drive, and so this is the main partition of this drive, and it's the second partition of SDA. and those are always identified by letters and numbers. And so the next hard drive in this hooked up to a Linux system would be SDB, and then the next drive would be SDC, and so on. The second hard drive that I have hooked up here is this Fujitsu hard drive. This is my customer's bad hard drive. Back over here, you see that the information over here is showing up correctly. It says that the partition type is a Linux file system, ext version 4. Everything's fine there. But this Linux hard drive is showing up with nothing in particular. So the main partition here is SDB1, but partition type should be ext4. And should be showing up, that way. But instead, up here on the assessment, it says disk is okay, one bad sector. Well, that's actually probably way more than just one bad sector, but that's what we're dealing with here. Is that the hard drive is not healthy enough to show up inside the Nautilus file manager. So, what I want to talk about is this bailout utility that is awesome. It's called Test Disk, and this is actually from a technician. He's got a website that's www.cgsecurity.org. CG probably standing for his initials. Christophe Grenier, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. And you can go to the CG Security website and download the test disk for your particular operating system. If it happens to be Windows, he has a Windows installation there, and other operating systems. But in the case of Ubuntu, test disk is already in the Ubuntu repository. So if you just open up a terminal window and type in sudo apt install test disk, that will install that program for you, and you'll be set to go. And now this is a terminal application, so you're not going to open it from your applications menu in Ubuntu. You're going to have to open a terminal to do this. So let me get over to my terminal, and we'll type in sudo test disk, and then it asks for my password, so I type that in, and this is the first screen that will be presented to you. Now, as a reminder, this is all running inside of a terminal prompt, so you're not going to really use your mouse for anything. Everything is just going to be arrow keys and the enter key and so on. So you only have 3 choices at this particular screen dialog. So you've got create, append, and no log. And this is just going to create a log file, which might be useful to you. So you can choose no log if you want to, but I would just leave it on create a new log. It'll show up in your own home directory. So I'll hit the enter key. Now this is just asking, so what hard drive are you having trouble with that you want to access? And of course the SDA, the first item up here, is actually my main hard drive, and so the one that is unhealthy is SDB. So I'll use my arrow key to select that, and then down at the bottom you see the word proceed and then quit. If I just press enter, then we'll be doing the proceed command, and then at that point it's going to ask you what the partition is. Is it an Intel partition, and it has guessed that, or is it a newer partition, the EFI GPT partition, or is it maybe it's a Mac partition or whatever? But it's actually, I think this is going to guess at it every time, and it guessed correctly. So I don't need to change that. I'll just hit the enter key and go from there. Now this test disk program is capable of doing all kinds of things, but really all I want to get accomplished here is to to grab the data and copy it to a healthy hard drive and call it good. So what we actually want to do here is to select the item called Advanced, the second item here, and then press Enter. Now this shows that there are 3 partitions on this drive, and we want to choose the partition that is the largest one, the one with the most sectors, which is the very first one here. So that's perfect. So we're not going to change the partition there, but we are going to change the option down at the bottom. It starts off by default highlighting super block, and so I'll use the right arrow to select list and then press enter. Now we are in the section where we are looking at the source directory. In other words, we want to find the directory that we want to be able to copy data from. Now this is a Linux hard drive, and so you will immediately start recognizing, if you're a Linux person, that these are the folders or the directories that you would see on any Linux system. And actually the one that we're most concerned with is where the data is, which is in the home directory. So I'll select that just by using arrow keys and then pressing enter to go to the home directory. Now, inside the home directory in the Windows arena, just like the users directory in Windows, will have the particular user listed there. In this case, the particular user in the home directory is Lou, and so I'm going to select that and then press enter. Now we're seeing Lou's home directories. So there's his desktop, downloads, templates, documents, and so on. And actually, we're just going to go ahead and pull items from his pictures folder. So I'll press the enter key, and this is our next dialog. Now, just to have you focus your eyes up here at the top, we are looking at the home directory that belongs to Lou, and then the subdirectory called Pictures. Now, I'm not real sure about the red. When you press the H key down here, all the red items go away. And if I press H again, then they come back. I've decided it's saying that when you see the red files and you press H, then they disappear. You are hiding the deleted files. I'm not exactly sure how that works. I did a comparison between hiding those files and not hiding the files, and I could not see much difference. So, and I'll scroll down here far enough so that you can see that there are some items that are just appear not in red. So that's how that looks when you see the whole thing. But I decided to just grab everything in this folder. So they give you an instruction down here at the bottom that says press A to select all files. So I'll press the letter A, and you'll see that all the items in here now have asterisks next to them. And then it says to copy the selected files, make sure to press uppercase C. If you do the lowercase c, you're going to only select one file. So I'll press Shift C, and now this has switched over to our destination directory. So I'll switch my slide over here. This is now looking at my home directory, and it's asking me where I want to put this into my home directory. So I'm going to I have created a folder called Restore, so I'm going to select that one and press enter, and then at this point it's just time to start the process, and the instructions up here just say press capital C to if the destination is correct, and of course the directory right here pointing at the restore folder. That is correct. So that's what we're going to do. So I'll do Shift C, and then it will start its process. Now this will take a little while, so I'll just pause my video for a moment, and then we'll come back. Okay, this is the completed task. If you take a look up here, it says copy done, 375 files were copied, 0 failed. And so at this point, I can just press Q several times to quit out of everything and exit, and we're set to go. Now, there is still a problem. So just one more thing that has to be done. I'll have you take a look at my file manager here, and we'll go to the restore directory, and here is the result. Now, you'll notice that there is a padlock symbol showing up there. When we do permissions on this, we find out that this has been assigned to root, so it doesn't belong to me, and so therefore I don't really have very good access to it. And so we need to make a little bit of a change there. This is what I'm referring to here. There's a let's open up another terminal prompt, make it big enough so you can see it, get it over there. Now to make this change, we need to change ownership for that restore folder, and so it's going to be a sudo chown -R, and then it's in the form of user:\group, and then your directory. To change that slightly so that it makes a bit more sense, in my case it's going to be sudo chown, and then minus uppercase R, and then my username, and then every user in Linux belongs to a group that is named the same. So you can just say user:user, in my case Knut:\Knut, and then I do a tilde sign, and then /restore. Tilde is shorthand for my home directory. Otherwise I would have to type it in as /home/Knut/restore. So let's pop over to let's see, I'll get this in place so we can see it actually happen here. So sudo chown-R, my name, my group name, and then tilde restore, like that. And then I'll have to type in my password, and then I'm done. Now if you look over here, you see that padlock was just removed, and so if I start to double click through here, you'll see that this is actually this has maintained the folder structure of Lou's home directory and in the pictures folder, and so we have recovered these pictures, and so that's just a very nice capability, and it was just using test disk to accomplish this, and then also to take ownership of that folder after you're done, and you've just pulled data seemingly out of thin air. So that's pretty cool. I do want to thank you for watching, and please leave any comments if this tutorial helped you, and please look forward to future videos from OSY Guy. Thanks for watching.
Okay. Now, I want to add to this, though his presentation is using this on Linux, it does exist in Windows. It may also exist in Mac OS as well. I don't know. I know of no graphical user interface for this utility. If somebody finds a graphical user interface or a graphical program of what test disk does, please let me know. It's not that difficult once you have something like this video to go through in using the tool, at least not for me. For other people, I can't speak to that. Because every one of us is different. We're at different levels in computer knowledge and use. So for me, now that I have an understanding how to use the tool, I'm certain I can use it in the future. I wish I could have used it somewhat at times in the past, but I didn't have the necessary knowledge of how the tool worked. So I'm going to go to the next one here. This one is a little weird. It talks about in the title the GUI DD rescue, but in reality he doesn't cover it. And I can't find another one of his videos. So I'm going to just play this and point out there are quite a
Hi,
few
my name is
things.
Jonathan and welcome to this how-to video where we'll attempt to rescue bits from a failing USB disk using GNU DD Rescue. So, disk failures are inevitable. If you've never had one yet, it's probably just a matter of time before you do. And if your media starts to fail and you care about the data on there, then it's important to get your data off of it as soon as possible before it starts to fail further. Today I'm going to use DD Rescue to recover the maximum amount of data possible from this failing USB flash drive. You can also use DD Rescue on mechanical disks such as these, and in both cases there has to be enough life left in the disks for the operating system to detect it. If you switch on a mechanical disk and all you hear is clunk sounds, then you would have to take some further advanced steps first. So you might think, well, you can just DD it, right? So let's try that out. Sudo DD input file equals dev SDC, which is my flash disk device. OF equals SDC.image.
Now, I bring this, I pause this at the moment because this gives you how to use the built-in DD command to copy a whole disk or individual files and folders. By knowing the name, it would be SDC and either a 1 for the first partition, 2 for the second partition, etc. And you might have a slash, a folder name, or several folder names, depending on how far you got to drill down. And eventually, all the files in the last folder you specify are going to be copied to this image.
And after a few seconds, it will hit a bad place on the disk, and DD will just fall over and give up. And there we go, it has done so. So let's see if cat works any better. Nope.
Now the cat command is concatenate, and he's trying to say go to the same original drive that's got a problem and redirect the output to this file here, but it won't do it.
It also gives up as soon as there is an IO error. Now, before I continue with DD Rescue, I want to mention that DD Rescue doesn't fix file systems. What it does is scan through your physical media and attempt to retrieve as many blocks from it as possible. In other words, you want to use this if your device has physical problems. If your device has no physical faults, then you could just as well use plain DD if you just want to make an image of your device. So let's give it a go. We have to run DD Rescue as root. The -D means direct disk access, -R is retries, and we'll do 3 of them on each bad block. And we want to do it on dev SDC, which is my USB disk, and we'll output that to sdc.img. and there you can see it running. Over here it will show the estimated remaining time, elapsed time, the amount of read errors will display there. We got to it fairly quickly with DD, so imagine it will show in any moment now. And it shows you the position on the disk and what it has tried and rescued. And there's our first read error. So I'll leave this running for a few minutes and come back closer to the end. And welcome to the future, where DD Rescue has just started to retry some parts that it hasn't gotten, and so far it's rescued 99.94% of the disk. Let's see if it can find those additional pieces. You can see our read error is increasing drastically suddenly, and also our bitrate is quite low. And there it has finished. And we can see that it has retrieved 99.99% of the disk, which is quite reasonable on a 16 gig USB flash disk. That's probably going to be most of the data that you actually wanted. So now that we've made that image, we can destroy the bad flash disk and flash that image back to a new disk, or do further operations on that image if we want. And that was DD Rescue. If you find this how useful, hit that like button. If you have any...
Now, he was doing this on a flash drive, which works mechanically much like an SSD drive, which brings up Wayne's question. So it's a combination of being able to handle solid state drives as well as mechanical drives. It works much the same way. But like the prior guy said, if it's a mechanical drive, you got a head crash. Every time the head goes over the bad area, you may be destroying the head that reads and writes to the disk. So you want to read it and get as much as you can right off the bat. So I'm going to get out of this one. And this is a pair of ones that show the graphical tool that you can run with DD Rescue.
Okay, so today I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of how to use DD Rescue GUI, and I'll walk you through the options as well. So what we're going to do is I have a perfectly working USB stick, which I can show you with this, which I can demonstrate this working with, and I also have a scratched optical disc, so I can show you what you might expect to happen when things don't work. So that's good. But we'll start with the USB stick first. So if I start DD Rescue GUI, I need to move the window over to this side. Okay, so I need to enter my password, so I'll be back with you in a second. Okay, so we'll gather some disk information and then you'll just get taken to this screen. So if you want to select your source and destination, you might think, what are all of these? These will look a bit different on macOS because they'll be /dev/disk and then numbers. But if you click on disk information, which is either here or in the menu here, it will tell you some information about each disk, so you can figure out which one is which. So you can see in here I have a Samsung SSD 860, which is my main drive, a hard drive, and here is my flash disk that I want to do the test with. So I know that that's SDE now and that it has a partition on it. So you can pick either depending on what you want. So I'm just going to go with the whole drive now for this one. And then you can specify your log file, or no, the map file now, it used to be called a log file. So if I just stick it on my desktop, then I can call it, I'll just call it test log. That can go there, and my destination can also be on the desktop, that's fine. So I will call it test.img, that's fine. So those are your basic 3 settings. But before you can start the recovery, you'll need to have a look at these as well. So the first one of these options is called, use direct disk access. And what that does is, if you have a highly damaged disk where it can't read very large parts of the disk that it can't read, then what you can do is, if you turn this option on, it will allow it to scrape a little bit more off the data off, but it might slow it down. Normally I'd just leave that on though. You also have a read backwards option. So what that means is, instead of reading from the start of the disk till the end, it will read from the end and then backwards to the start, which can be helpful if there's a lot of damaged areas on the start of the disk that are slowing it down and you think your disk might break soon. There's also a pre-allocate option to make sure you have enough space on your output disk. There is a soft run option which tells it to quit rather than attempt to read the bad areas of the disk, so it will just skip over them and then stop. And there is an overwrite output file or disk option, which you can use if, instead of doing what I'm doing, so what I'm doing is I'm taking an image of my USB drive and sticking it on my desktop, but if instead you're copying everything to another USB drive, then you'd want to turn this on to enable that and to allow you to do that. So then the remaining 3 options are number of times you want to retry bad sectors, which you can specify anywhere from no times to forever, but 2 times is probably good, because once it's tried twice, it's probably not going to be able to read anything else. A maximum number of errors before exiting. You can set this if you want to, if you're impatient and you want to try and change the settings after a certain number of errors have occurred, but the default is infinite for that. Have a number of clusters to copy at a time. This setting doesn't impact the success of your recovery, but on certain kinds of device it can be quicker to set this to a high or a low value. The default I've left at 128, which is fine most of the time, but if it's slow, then you could try and change it to 256 or 32, but we'll just go with 128. So then there are these 3 presets, and they change these 3 options. So if I set it to the best recovery, it will try and use fewer clusters, which can make it a bit slower, but you might have more luck on some devices. Balanced is what we've just seen, and if you set it to the fastest option, it won't try reading any bad sectors, and it will try and copy as many clusters at a time, which is generally quicker, but not always, but the general rule is that's quicker. So we'll just go with balanced and leave the rest of the options as they are for this one. So remaining things to explain are, so there is a user guide online which you can access here. If you want to check what version of the GUI you're running, you can click here. I'll tell you some other stuff as well. So just open these 2 and we'll hit start. I'll need to enter my password again, so I'll be back with you in a second. Okay, so password is entered and we are underway. So if you want a nice simplistic view of what's going on, you can close both of these. It will just tell you how long it's taken, how long it thinks it will take, and your progress. And then in the status bar here you can see what it's doing. And that information will change if it has to retry areas of the disk. If you want some more information, you can open the detailed information pane, which will tell you exactly how much data it's recovered, how much it hasn't been able to read, the current read rate, the average rate, how many bad sectors there are, position on the disk, and the time since it last managed to read anything, which is normally quite a useful metric, because sometimes you'll find you just get stuck, say your drive overheats or something if it's a hard drive, or it just encounters too many errors and gives up, so then you might want to stop your recovery and start it again once it's cooled down. If you want more information than that, you can open the terminal output, which will tell you stuff like the version of DD Rescue you've got, how much data it's going to copy, some of the settings, and you'll see much the same information as here, but depending on your version of DD Rescue you might see some more. So here I also have error rate, for example, and I also have the number of bad areas, which are like groups of bad sectors, and the total number of read errors it's encountered. Because this disk is fine, I'm expecting it to just finish this pretty quickly, and it should just work, and that'll be fine. In the meantime, there is also a feature to check for updates, which it does on startup. So if there's a new version of the GUI that fixes some issue, that might be helpful. If it finds anything, it will pop up with this dialog on startup and tell you that there's a new version and tell you what's new. But the rest of the time, it will just not do anything apart from send you a notification if everything is fine. So we will skip to the end here, rather than make you wait another couple of minutes for this to finish. Okay, so we're coming up to the end here. You can see it looks fine. There haven't been any unreadable data. There haven't been any bad sectors. And the read rate is pretty high. So when it finishes, you will see finished there, and you'll get a dialog here telling you, so in this case all data has been recovered, and then it will say we may now use DD Rescue GUI to mount the file or the drive so we can access the data. Okay, it will tell you some other stuff. If you've aborted it, it will tell you that, and if it hasn't managed to read everything, it will tell you. So then you get this little dialog which will tell you how much it's managed to read and where the data is. So if you want to access your files now, you can hit mount, and I need to give it my password, so I'll just pause quickly. Okay, so if you specified a partition, it will just mount it and tell you where to find it. In my case, I specified the whole device, SDE, rather than SDE1, so it will list all the file systems here on that drive. In this case there's only one, so I can just hit OK and it will mount it. So it tells me it's mounted there. So if I open my file manager, which is here, then I can see in that we need to go to /mount. Sometimes this will appear on your desktop. So if you're running this on Mac OS, you will just get the drive icon on your desktop and on certain Linux distributions. So I'll just go to mount, and then it is /dev/mapper loop0 partition1. And that is the file I put on the USB stick to demonstrate where the data would be if there was any. So let's say I've copied this off to my desktop. So I've got the data. I can then close that and hit unmount, and then I'll enter my password again. Okay, so I've entered my password and it's unmounted it, and we are done. So I will now switch. Okay, so this is getting long, so I'm going to split this into 2 videos. The next video is going to be called Part 2, and it will involve almost the same process, but it will also demonstrate how to restart the recovery if it's not working, and it will show you what you might expect to see if you have a damaged disk. So I will be back with you in a second.
Okay, now play the second one.
Okay, so we're back, and this
Seems like the sound cut out. Darn it. Gosh darn it.
is just put the disk in, let you just listen to the interesting noise it makes for a second, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we're seeing errors coming in here now. So that's good. Because the first time I had to try a couple of times to even get it to take the disk. Okay, so it's noticed the disk's in there anyway, so we'll specify CD-ROM, and the log can be on my desktop, and I'll just call it cd.log, that's fine. And so the destination can also be there, and I will call that cd.image. That's fine. So next we'll go through the settings. So because this disk is completely trashed basically, I'm going to stick it on the best recovery mode, so it tries to read smaller chunks. And we'll start with reading forwards. I might change that. I'll show you how to restart the recovery as well, if you need to do that for whatever reason. So we're going to have a lag here as it tries to figure out the block size it should read. The block size DD Rescue needs to use to read from the disk. So if this takes a really long time, I will cut this out of the video recording so you don't have to sit through it. That's not so bad. Okay, so we just done. Oh, okay. I normally double check them. I shouldn't have. That's fine. Oh, something is happening. I guess that's it trying to mount the disk. So maybe we will have some luck. Unable to read inode block, it says. So we'll open the detailed information, because it will be useful for this one. And then we will hit start. I'll be back with you in a second. Okay, I have entered my password, so it should start trying to read stuff in a second. The disk is just taking so long to respond, it's probably delaying it. Here we go. So it tried to mount the disk. It has mounted the disk. We're not going to run the software though. So you can see stuff beginning to come in here. So there is some data it hasn't yet been able to read. So it's just sort of trying to skip over the damaged areas of the disk first. Is what it's doing. So we're going to see if it can find some readable stuff, and then it will come back over for a pass on the difficult stuff. I've really damaged this disk, so I'm not sure how much readable stuff there's going to be, but we'll see. I'm just going to let you watch this for a second. I'll put it in fast forward. Okay, so you can see that we have actually managed to read a whole 16 kilobytes of data in 1 minute. And it thinks it's going to take, both of these estimates say that it thinks it's going to take a very long time to read anything, which is probably quite accurate. But the one in the terminal output is usually better if you have it. So I'm just going to show you a little trick here, which is to set the read speed of the optical drive to 1 times, because sometimes that gives you a small boost in terms of how quickly it manages to read stuff. I don't know why it doesn't do this itself, but it does help sometimes. So on Linux you can type sudo eject-x and then the name of your device, which in this case is /dev/cd-rom.
Now, in case you didn't catch it, he's using here DD Rescue on a scratched up optical disc. Whether it's a CD or a DVD doesn't matter as much. But that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to recover material from an optical drive. Since optical drives are kind of obsolete, how often we would use it, it doesn't matter. The same principle applies to a hard disk, solid state drive, a flash drive. It doesn't matter what the media is. And DD Rescue is really for Linux. It's not one that can cross-platform that I'm aware of to Windows and Mac.
It's weird because the command's eject, -x1 for 1 times. It's weird because the command's eject, but it does work. So we'll do that. I'll pause it for a second while I enter my password. Okay, so this will normally hang for a bit because, here we go, that wasn't so bad. It will normally hang then because the disk is actually trying to do something and it takes a really long time to respond. But that wasn't so bad. And you can see we are actually pulling off little bits of data. So we might get something. But what I did notice earlier is if I bring up the file manager with that disk, here we go, it chugs for a minute. But it does actually list the files, or it did. I'll just shrink this window a bit. Let's see what it does. It did it last time. No? Okay. Well, before it listed the files in there, this is just an old Mondo disk from when I used to use that for my backups, when I used to back up to DVD, because that was a thing at some point. But as you can see, we're now reading 40 kilobytes. We've now read 40 kilobytes. So it's going to take a while, but chances are we will get something off the disk, even if it's not very much. So I will pause this again and start fast forwarding it for you so you don't have to wait. Okay, so you're probably thinking at this point, it's been going for what, 12 minutes, and we have read about 60 kilobytes. And at the moment it's trying to read around 84 megabytes on the disk. I think the disk has, how much does the disk have? So the disk only has 130 megabytes on it. If this was a larger disk, you might at this point be thinking this is ridiculous, so I'm going to try the end of the disk instead, which is fair enough. So I'll show you how you do that. So first thing is just hit abort and enter your password. Okay, so it'll tell you aborted your recovery, and the disk drive in this case will stop making those horrible noises. So then you want to reset, which means password. Okay, so it took a couple of minutes of chugging before it finished trying to get disk information. I wonder what it says. Yes, it hasn't been able to figure out what the size is. But we can still pick from the list here. So we use the same log file, the same map file as before, which is really important because if you don't do that, it will start your recovery from scratch, which is almost definitely not what you want. And then we will pick the same output file as before, which is also really important. So it will give us a warning here saying if we're doing a multi-stage recovery, which is what we're doing here, and we've selected a log file or a map file, it will resume where it left off. Otherwise we will lose data. This is fine because we've used the same log file, we're using the same output file, and we're reading from the same disk. That's fine. So then go to the settings, and at this point I can change any of these settings and it will be fine. We won't lose any data. So I'm going to go with best recovery again, and this time I'm going to tell it to read the disk backwards in case that works a bit better, because this is taking a very long time. So we'll save the settings and then we will start. Okay, so you can see it's remembered that we rescued 53 kilobytes and it tried 3.5 kilobytes. Sorry, 3.5 megabytes. And it's now, if you look at its position, it's trying the end of the disk and going backwards. And it also tells you how much data it hasn't tried to read yet, which is about 120 megs. So it now says copying non-tried blocks past one backwards. So it's doing the same thing, it's just reading from the end of the disk. And you can see the errors coming in here. So what it will do normally is it will try and copy all non-tried blocks. Once it's done that, it will hopefully have managed to read something, and there will be a number of non-trimmed blocks, which you can see is filling up here. So then for each of those, it will try and read from the start and the end of those blocks, and hopefully get some more stuff. And then what it will try and do is try and read all of the data inside those known bad parts of the disk. Hopefully then it will read something else, and what it's left with are bad sectors. And then it will retry those for as many times as you specify, which in this case is 2 times, which is normally enough to get everything you're going to get off the disk. So yeah, you can restart your recovery as many times as you like, as long as these 3 options at the top are the same. That's the only thing that is important.
Okay, I'm stopping this because of time, and you can finish looking at it. I want to bring up another one. This one here. This one is something that even...
Hello and welcome to Bite My Pie. Before we get...
I think even Bob will like this one. Nuts.
Is there supposed to be sound?
Yes, and there's a problem, and I don't know what it is at the moment. Let's try that again. I don't know why it's cut out. Darn it. Berries. I'm going to stop and restart the share. Maybe that'll take care of the problem.
And now, on with the video. When you use a computer long enough, there can come a time when disaster strikes. It could be in the form of malware, a virus, or even the hardware itself giving up the ghost. Whatever the cause, wouldn't it be great if we could roll back the clock to before everything went pear-shaped? Fortunately, with the help of a specific type of software, we can do precisely that. The process we'll be looking at in this video is known as disk imaging, and it enables us to make an exact copy of our entire setup, operating system, programs and all, so that should our PC take a catastrophic nosedive into digital destruction, we can get back up and running with the minimum amount of fuss. To do this, we'll be using the free and open source RescueZilla, which works with Windows, Mac and Linux. So if this sounds of interest to you, stick around. To get started, besides the computer we would like to image, we'll also need a USB stick. A capacity of 2 GB or more will be plenty. This will be dedicated to the task of running RescueZilla. Think of it as your backup and recovery device, but it's important to note that the actual image or images we create will not be stored on the USB stick. Which brings us to the next consideration. There are a couple of ways we can store an image of our computer. The first is on an external device like a USB hard drive, for example. The second is to save it to a network share, such as that on a home server or network attached storage box. In this video we'll look at both of these scenarios. So without further ado, let's get cracking. You can think of creating a backup image like taking a photo or snapshot of your system. Everything, the operating system, programs, settings, files and folders, is saved at that exact moment as though frozen in time. Then if you later restore the image, your computer returns to that precise point. It's as though anything that occurred afterwards never happened. The first thing we need to do is download the software, so open your web browser and search for RescueZilla, and it's this one, rescuezilla.com. Let's head to the download section and download the latest live image by clicking on the link, and then save that to your computer. We also need to get some software to copy RescueZilla onto our USB stick. So this time search for Etcher, and it's this one here at Balena.io. I'm going to download the portable version and save that to my computer as well. And when you've got those, you can close your web browser. Okay, let's go and find them in File Explorer's Downloads directory. If you haven't already, now's the time to connect your USB stick to your computer. And then we're going to double click Etcher to launch the software. Once the program opens, select Flash from File, and then locate and open RescueZilla. Hopefully Etcher has automatically detected your USB stick. If not, you can click on Change to select it. And when you're ready to proceed, click on Flash. And select Yes to continue. If you get a message about formatting the disk, just cancel it. And with the flash complete, we can close the program and remove the USB stick from our computer. First then, we're going to create an image of our PC onto an external USB hard drive. Make sure that the RescueZilla USB stick is plugged into the computer and that the external hard drive is connected as well. We haven't discussed when is a good time to create a system image. I would suggest that whenever you purchase a new PC, this is one of the first things that you do. That way you always have a backup image to restore the computer to its factory settings, which is especially handy if you ever decide to sell it. You can see that this computer is at the start of its Windows 10 setup, which, as I just mentioned, is a great time to image it. So let's first shut it down in order to do this. We can do that by holding down the Shift key on our keyboard and tapping F10 to access the command prompt. From there, type shutdown space /S space /T space 0. The /S tells the computer to shut down as opposed to say restart, and the /T stands for timeout. In other words, how long before the command is executed. In this case 0 seconds or immediately. So let's press the enter key to run the command. As we turn on the computer, we need to tap the relevant key to access its boot menu. If it doesn't have a boot menu, you'll need to do this in the UEFI or BIOS. We're looking to choose our USB stick, the one with RescueZilla on it, so I'll use the cursor keys to do just that, and press enter to boot from it. Again, you can use the cursor keys to choose your required language, and then press enter to select it. If you experience any issues with RescueZilla not displaying correctly, you can restart your computer and try the graphical fallback mode. But in the first instance, select Start RescueZilla. Here we have RescueZilla's welcome screen, which, having only 3 options, keeps things nice and straightforward. So the one we want right now is Backup. You need to select the drive that you want to back up, which for me is this 120GB SSD, and then click on Next. Unless you know what you're doing and have a good reason for changing this, you'll want to leave all of the partitions selected, and then click on Next again. Here we need to select the destination drive for our backup image. So leave connected directly to my computer selected, and then click on the external drive, which in my case is this 1TB USB. Then click on Next once again. By default, the image will be created on the root of your external drive, but to keep things tidy, let's create a folder to put it in. To do this, click on Browse and then click on the little folder icon at the top right. Give the new folder a name. I'm just going to call mine Bite My Pie, and then click on Create. With that done, click on OK. You can see now that it's going to put my image into my new Bite My Pie folder, so I'll click on Next to continue. You can either stick with the default name for your image, or if you'd sooner you can give it a more meaningful name. And when you're ready to proceed, click on Next once more. Finally, we get a chance to confirm that everything's correct before we create the image, and if you're happy to continue, click on Next. Even though this is only imaging Windows, as I haven't yet added any extra software or data to this computer, this process will still take a little while, so I'll pause the video and come back when it's complete. Great, so the backup image saved successfully, and that took 8.1 minutes as it tells us. So I'll click on Next, and that returns us to the RescueZilla welcome screen. To finish, we can open the menu at the bottom left of the screen and shut down the computer, and then click Shut Down again to do so. With the USB drive connected to our computer, we can view the backup image in File Explorer. Click on the drive letter that corresponds to your USB device, and you'll either see the name of your image or the name of the subdirectory if you created one. So here's the image I created. It's actually a folder, and we can double click on it to have a look inside. Contained within are all of the files related to the system image. Of particular note are the GZ or gzip files, which belong to the compressed image. And there we have our backup image. By the way, if we return to the root of the USB drive, while I personally prefer to keep things separate and dedicate a drive to backups, there's nothing stopping you from storing other data on here as well. Just don't put it in your image directory. It's important to note that you should only restore an image onto the same type of hardware from which it was created. For example, an image created from a Dell PC shouldn't be used to try and recover a computer manufactured by Lenovo. In the event of hardware failure, in order to avoid further issues, the faulty component should ideally be replaced with an identical part before the image is restored. While it's best to stick to this policy as much as possible, one exception is internal storage. It's fine to replace this with a different brand and even a different capacity, providing the new drive is at least the same size as the original. In other words, if the computer came with a 500GB hard drive, the replacement should also be 500GB or larger. So taking these considerations into account, let's get to it. Let's say something goes wrong with your computer. In this case, Windows is no longer detected, so it's going straight into the UEFI. Fret not, because we now have our backup image. We need to boot the PC from our RescueZilla USB stick again, and start RescueZilla once more. This time we're going to select Restore. Start by selecting the image location. The source drive is connected directly to your computer, and in my case it's the 1TB USB drive. Once you've selected yours, click on Next, and if you save the image in a subfolder like I did, rather than directly on the root of the drive, click on Browse. We then need to locate the image. I put mine inside the Bite My Pie folder that I created, and there it is, Windows 10 Factory Settings, so I'll select that and click OK. From there, click Next. Then we need to select the drive to restore, which is your computer's internal drive, or in my case the 120GB SSD. Then click Next again. As with when you created the backup image, unless you know what you're doing and have a good reason for not choosing them, leave all of the partitions selected. Make sure you leave Overwrite Partition Table selected as well. Then click on Next to continue. Check over the configuration you've just chosen. I can see that the source image is in the Bite My Pie folder on my external USB drive, and that the destination drive is my 120GB SSD. It's going to restore all of the partitions and recreate the original partition table. So to do just that, let's click Next. As this is going to wipe all of the data on the destination drive, we need to confirm that we do indeed wish to proceed. So click Yes to do so. Just as when we created the backup image itself, restoring from it will also take some time. I'll pause the video once more and return when it's done. Marvellous! As we can see, the backup has successfully restored. This time it took 5.1 minutes. Let's click on Next to continue, and once again we find ourselves back at RescueZilla's welcome screen. Now, as the old expression goes, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, so let's see if the restore has actually worked. First, we need to shut down the computer. Then, after removing both the external USB drive and the RescueZilla USB stick, power your PC back on. And look at that, we're now back in business, ready to set up our computer as though we'd only just taken it out of the box. Another good time to create a system image is once you have your PC set up exactly as you like it. In some ways this is even more useful than the image of when your computer was brand new, though I'd suggest you create an image of both of these states. The reason I say that this second image is even more useful is because should disaster now strike, you can easily return the PC to how it was when all was well, without needing to reinstall your favourite programs and reconfigure the settings and appearance. To demonstrate this, I've got this Windows 10 PC up and running and installed some of my favourite software on it. You can see shortcuts to LibreOffice, VLC and GIMP on the desktop. I've also changed the wallpaper and customised the start menu. This time, rather than an external USB drive, we're going to create the image onto a network share. So I'll shut down the computer, connect my RescueZilla USB stick and power the PC back on. We need to boot from the USB stick, choose the language and start RescueZilla. Select Backup from the welcome screen and choose the drive we want to image. As before, mine is the 120GB SSD. For our purposes we want to keep all of the partitions selected, but this time instead of having the destination drive connected directly to my computer, we're going to pick shared over a network. In order to connect to our network share we need to enter some details. At a bare minimum you'll need to enter the server or share location. This is in the format // followed by the IP address of either the server or your NAS, then another / and the name of your network share. I've got an Open Media Vault NAS and the name of the share is OMV Share. If anyone can connect to your network drive and add files to it, this should be all you need to enter. However, if like mine you require a username and password to connect, you need to enter them into the corresponding boxes. With that done, click on Next. If you're happy to create the image directly onto the network share, you can click on Next again. But if you'd sooner do a bit of housekeeping, you can create a subfolder to put it in. To do this, click on the little folder icon and give the folder a name, then click Create and now click on OK. And you can see that it's going to create the image inside my new PC image folder. Let's click on Next. And now we can either leave this default name for our image or give it a more meaningful title. Double check that you've made the right selections and then we'll start the process. Depending on several factors, not least of which is the speed of your network, this may take a little longer than a directly connected backup image, so it's definitely a good time to grab that all-important coffee. With the process complete and our backup image saved successfully, we can click on Next and from there shut down the computer. As with the local backup image, if you're curious you can also take a look at the network one. On Windows I'll do this in File Explorer. I simply enter // the IP address of my network attached storage, / and the name of my network share, which is OMV Share, and press enter. Since my NAS is password protected, I need to enter my username and password and then click on OK. You can see that my network share now has a PC image folder within it, and if I double click that, there's my Windows 10 ready to go image. As with the locally stored image, again this is another folder containing all of the components that make up the backup image. OK, let's close out of there. To restore the backup image we need to boot from our RescueZilla USB stick. So this time click on Restore. The source drive is our server or NAS, so click on Shared over a network. Enter the server or share location in the format shown on screen. If your network share requires a username and password, enter those as well, then click on Next to proceed. If you saved your image directly onto the share, it should appear in the highlighted area, in which case make sure it's selected and click on Next. But if you placed it in a subdirectory, click on Browse instead. Mine's in PC image, so I'll single click to select it and then click on OK. With the image highlighted, click on Next, and now we need to select the destination drive, which in my case is the 120GB SSD. Make sure that all of the partitions are selected, as well as overwrite partition table. Double check that your configuration is correct and then click on Next again. And because this is going to overwrite the contents of our computer's internal drive, we need to confirm that this is what we want to do. Right, I'll pause the video once more and return upon completion. We can see from the summary that everything's been successfully restored, so if we click on Next and shut down the computer, we can try it out and make sure. Disconnect the RescueZilla USB stick from your PC and power it back on. If we log in, you can see that everything is just as we left it, as though this configuration has been perfectly preserved in time. So no matter what catastrophes lurk ahead, we should always be able to return to this point, which is precisely the reason we created an image in the first place. So let's say something got messed up. We'll delete a couple of the desktop shortcuts. Not exactly the end of the world, but let's remove them from the recycle bin as well. Oh dear, now we really are in trouble. Obviously I'm exaggerating, but hopefully you get the idea. The change would usually be something a lot more severe. But regardless of the reason, by performing the same steps we did earlier, we can reset our computer back to a perfectly working state. If we boot the computer from the RescueZilla USB stick, there's one more option on the welcome screen. This has the label Image Explorer. You'll notice that it's also still in beta. Let's select it to take a closer look at what this is. The idea is that we can select a previously created backup image. So I'll browse for the one on my external USB drive that I created earlier, and then OK that. If I select it and click Next, in theory I can choose the partition where my data is stored, which if there was any data on it would be this 60GB NTFS one. Remember, this particular image was taken from a new Windows installation, so there won't be any personal data in there anyway. But let's say that there was something that we wanted to extract. The purpose of this Image Explorer tool is to enable us to mount our image in order to peruse the data within it. You would do this by double clicking on the partition that contains the required data. The problem currently is that, as it tells us, this operation will be unusably slow. At this point in time, certainly while this feature remains in beta, I wouldn't advise trying to use it, so I'll cancel out of there and then go back to the welcome screen. While the ability to recover individual files from an image may be useful, personally I don't consider it by any means essential. My reasoning is that to me, images are best treated as a recovery tool to restore the whole system should the doo-doo hit the fan. I certainly don't see them as a replacement for backing up your important data, and I'd recommend that you treat these two areas as separate entities. The eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that RescueZilla's welcome screen is actually a closable window. And the final area I'd like to draw your attention to in this video is what's lurking behind it. When we boot into RescueZilla, it not only loads the imaging tool, but also a complete mini operating system. As you can see, this has several shortcuts on the desktop. AR&R is a tool primarily designed to control multiple monitors if you have them. This seems a little extravagant for a system recovery solution, but there you have it. We also have a built-in file manager if you'd like to have a poke around in there. Perhaps more useful is the Firefox web browser. If you only have a single PC and its usual operating system has become unusable, you could connect to the internet and carry out some further research in here. We have access to a terminal if you're feeling particularly adventurous, and underneath that is gparted. This could be very useful. Say for example you decide to dedicate an external USB drive to your system images, and you'd like to make sure that it's set up correctly before doing so. With the drive connected to your computer, select it from the drop-down list. I'm going to go with my 1TB hard disk. Right click on any of the partitions, here there's only one, to make sure that they're not mounted. Then click in the white space to close the menu and select Device. Next, choose Create Partition Table. It's important that you've selected the right drive, as continuing will wipe the entire disk. If your USB drive is 2 TB or smaller, leave the partition type on MS-DOS. But if it's larger than 2 TB, change this to GPT. Then click on Apply. Next, click on the new partition icon. Leave all of the sizes on their defaults to create one single large partition. The file system you choose will depend on what type of computer you're using. For Windows PCs, I'd suggest going with NTFS. You can give the drive a label to make it easier to identify. I'll go with USB. And when you've made your selections, click on Add. To write all of our changes to the disk, we need to click on the green tick. And then, providing you're happy to continue, click on Apply. Once it's complete, you can close out of the program. If you'd like to check your handiwork, you should be able to see the drive in File Manager. Obviously there's nothing on there yet, but it's now ready to go. RescueZilla also has a handy little text editor called Mousepad, if you'd like to make any notes. And then you can use the final desktop shortcut to relaunch the RescueZilla program. On the bottom of the screen we have a taskbar and the little start menu that we've seen before. Besides being able to shut down from here, we also have access to the programs supplied with the operating system, and below that some system preferences. On the bottom right of the taskbar we can control or mute the volume, view our network settings, and see the date and time. And that in a nutshell is RescueZilla's desktop. When faced with an unusable PC, an added bonus of having a USB stick with RescueZilla on it is potentially being able to recover your data, even if you haven't created an image containing it. Provided the storage isn't encrypted, you may be able to retrieve files and folders from it. To do this, open File Manager and select your computer's internal drive. In the case of Windows, navigate to the Users folder, then into the name of your account. And because you're now inside the home directory, you should see your files and folders. Let's say I want to recover everything inside the music directory. If I right click on it and choose Copy, and then connect a second USB stick to my computer, I can select that and paste the music folder into it. And if there had been any on it, this would have rescued my tunes from the ailing computer. While this has nothing to do with imaging, it shows another benefit of keeping RescueZilla available on one of your flash drives. And that brings us to the end of this video.
I'm going to stop that. He was demonstrating version 2.0. The current version is 2.4, and the only thing I'm going to show you here was something I saw right there, I think, if it'll show me it. There we go. There's actually in here, instead of 3 icons, there's now 4. And the one in the middle here that's covered up, I'll see if I can get to the, there it is. This one here is verified. Most of the utility tools for rescuing media do not have a verification. This says when you do use RescueZilla to do an image backup, before you end everything, you can do this verify to make sure the image copy properly reflects what you were copying from. And that validates that you have a good backup. Otherwise, you're taking a gamble that the backup that you made is good without the verification. That's as far as I'm going to go at the moment because of the hour. Right now, I'm going to see if I can. Oops, I didn't want that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
Now, is this good for Linux backup as well as Windows?
Most of these tools will work regardless of the operating system. They ignore what operating system you have because they're just reading whatever is on the disk and making an image file of it. Hang on a minute.
Now I couldn't help but notice that this RescueZilla is just a GUI wrapper of CloneZilla.
Yes, that's correct.
And then behind that, the disk contains some other utilities.
Yes.
Gparted, yeah.
Well, and it will also take and give you the ability to use CloneZilla's images, because it really is CloneZilla with a graphical user interface in front of it. I'm putting a PDF in chat, I hope. Hey, you rat. Let's see. Yeah, I want to send the file. Hang on a minute. I'm trying to send you a file. Nuts. Oh, it wants to do it its way. This is, okay. Out in the chat, if you click on chat icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should be able to see that there is a PDF file out there called CCS Linux SIG. It says edia notes.pdf, and it has a green check mark. If you click on that, it will download to your computers somewhere in the probably your default download folder. And the one thing I want to bring up here in that file, I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to share, I hope. All right. Here's what it looks like. I added this, and the reason for that is if you take this URL that looks like plain text, hold down the control key and click on it, it will open a new tab with that tutorial. If you, as you go down the list, somewhere around the bottom here, it decided, oh, we'll make a normal looking blue colored URL. You just have to click it. You don't have to hold down the control key. Why that is, I can't begin to tell you, and I couldn't figure out how to get them all looking the same. So I'm just telling you, if it looks like text, hold down the control key, then click it. If it's got the blue, just click it, and it'll open up a new tab. I'm sorry about that. I can't explain what it did and why it did it. But in any case, it's water over the hill anyhow. So that's what we are covering tonight. Next month, I'm hoping I will have time to go through the Vanessa upgrade of Linux Mint from whatever version you've got. Mine's 20.3 to the new, I think it's 2104. Bob, you're muted.
It's Mint 21,
Okay.
and it is Vanessa, and it's based on Ubuntu 2204 LTS, also known as Jammy Jellyfish.
Okay. So we'll try and cover that next month. I didn't have time to play with it.
Also, the download failed, and I am unable to retry.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, my download didn't work.
Download of which? The chat?
From the chat, find in folder doesn't find it. Open file doesn't open it.
No, I tried download, nothing shows up.
Worked on mine. Mine opens in a browser, which is how my PDFs open anyway on this box.
Nuts.
Did not work on my computer, and I'm running Mint.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Well,
I'm running Windows.
I'm on Win.
It only works in Windows. It only works in Windows.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. That's the first I've heard that.
It's the first time I've seen that happen.
Yeah. What I'll have to do is I'll have to email you guys a copy of this.
Yeah, because I'm running Mint, so I can't download
Well,
it.
I'm on Mint, and that's what I sent it on. I run all this from my Mint machine, but the connection and the sharing was from the Mint, but I'm viewing it and recording this on Windows.
Yeah.
Just
Tim?
email me the file and I'll send it out to the attendees.
Yeah.
All right, that works.
Tim, quick question.
Not allowed. Go ahead.
How big of a flash drive does the program need?
Which one?
The last one.
RescueZilla, it tells you up front that it takes around a 2 gigabyte flash
Okay.
drive.
Small one.
Yeah, I use a lot of small ones. I had a lot of old small drives. They come in handy for me because anything that's going to be bootable, I want to have the smallest drive I can have so I don't have a lot of wasted space and or be tempted to put other files on that empty space. And now I want to upgrade to a new version of that software. Well, that means I got to copy all those other files off first, because as soon as I try and put the new version on, it's going to wipe out the entire drive. So keep that in mind. All right. Is there any other questions or issues?
I assume that if you had like a terabyte hard drive, you could, and you had enough space, you could make more than one version of the RescueZilla, whatever it is.
Your backup, you mean?
Not the backup, but the image. More than one image.
Well, an image is a compressed file. Normally speaking, I have lots of these drives, and I create a folder per machine, and I will have anywhere between 1 and a dozen backups per machine,
right,
until the whole darn drive is full. Then I get another one and start the process over again.
I understand. I just wanted to confirm. As long as it's a different folder, you're all set.
Yeah, you want the other folders per machine, because if you don't have organization, and trying to figure out what image I want for a given machine would be a nightmare.
So you could have multiple backups on like a 1 terabyte hard drive.
Right. Well, I've even got a couple of 500 gigabyte drives I use for backup. Most of them are 1 terabyte, and I've got 1 or 2 2 terabyte drives. They handle tons of backups. And
Yeah.
I'm not kidding when I say that. The minimum number of backups you should have on a given machine is 3. But if you want to have more for good insurance purposes, you keep more backup images. Because if you get infected bad enough, you're going to want to go back to the first backup image you can find that doesn't have the infection. That
Yeah.
could be a big span of time. That means anything from that backup image is very old. You have to do an OS update. All your programs got to be updated. And if you didn't have a separate backup of your data files, you got that issue. And there's still going to be changes you may have made to your system that aren't backed up. And those are settings and stuff like that per program and OS settings that may have changed. So you're going to have some work, but you may be able to recover the majority of it without the infection. That's important for ransomware. Okay? All right, and I think we're going to call it a night. It's already past 9:30 here, and it's later for Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah, one other question, Tim. Is your PDF notes file 41 kilobytes in size?
Hang on a minute. I'll have to look. To be frank, I don't know.
I'm seeing 41.7.
Yeah, and does it open in your computer and show the entire file?
Yeah.
It's a text file. Shows a
No,
9.
that's a PDF.
I mean it's a PDF, but it's a PDF of a text.
Yes.
Okay, well, if it shows the whole thing, yeah, that's the whole file, and it just doesn't work in Linux.
Huh. I don't know why. It was made on Linux. I made it with LibreOffice, and I exported it to PDF, and that's what you got.
And I'm running Ubuntu here, and I can open it up and view it with no problem.
Okay, so at least 2 people have got it. Peter and Jeff got it. So I don't know what the issue is with Mint not being able to figure it out.
So Tim, is it 2 pages?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
actually,
it's just 2 pages.
It's about a page and a half.
Yeah, that would be around the 41 kilobyte size. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing I can do in this version of Zoom works at all for that.
Well, at the moment, Bob, Wayne, and Dennis will have to send you a copy.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just us.
Yeah, very good.
Well, I'll send it to everybody who attended. No problem.
Okay, fine.
Very good.
The other thing is in Mint, I don't know how to search the entire computer. Because there isn't a listing for the entire computer in the File Explorer.
Right. Yes, there is. I take that back.
Oh, wait a minute. File system.
Yeah, file system. That's the whole folder structure.
Okay. Now, what I'll do is start a PDF. Anyway, we don't have to hang on the line while I'm doing this.
Okay.
Because I've got everything I can get.
All right. We'll still send it out through.
Okay.
So I'll say good night to everybody, and we'll get this posted within a week.
Okay.
Have a good night, everybody, and I'll see you next month.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Presentation. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right, we got that. And I don't care about that ending. And at any rate, now we got that.